Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I went and made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game, and you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, this week we've got a few little bits of news, nothing massively exciting, but some things that we need to have a quick look at, and then we're going to be off to our second half of my Phantom Forces look, and I believe, and this was brought up to me by one of my followers on Twitter, that I may actually have forgotten to look at the Team Flare trainer cards last week, which is, of course, very rude of me. Now, I've gotten some very good feedback on my podcast last week. A lot of people thought it was very good, which I appreciate very much. So hopefully we'll be able to do as much this week. Last week we were looking at just a few cards. This week we'll go through all of the rest, and hopefully I'll be able to take you through anything that you need to know. One quick note before we do get going, my YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/PTCGRadio, has not been updated other than the podcast for a couple of weeks, and the reason very simply is, as I said last week, technical difficulties. Now, I can do just the podcast on my work laptop as is, so that's why I've been able to get that going. I don't have to use Camtasia, and I don't have to use PTCGO. I should, by the time you hear this, I should have been able to get all that stuff working on my home laptop. Unfortunately, on Wednesday, the day when this podcast will be coming out, there is unfortunately scheduled maintenance on PTCGO, so I shan't be able to record a video on Wednesday, so my apologies for that. But by the time this goes out, by the time this gets to Thursday, when this should be on YouTube, and a lot of you will be hearing this, I should be able to record some videos. So I'm hoping that a new video will be up on Thursday. And as I've promised people over Twitter, it will be a look at the Evolutions deck, which is far and away the most requested deck breakdown people have been asking for. And unfortunately, I did spend the end of half-term nursing my ill girlfriend, so unfortunately, I am a little bit under the weather at the moment, so if I get confused, make mistakes, do let me know. There is a moderately decent chance that it's going to happen. So first thing to tell you about is now the blister promos have been revealed. There are both 3-pack and 1-pack blisters, both of which come with a coin and a promo card as well. And these are ones which I believe I've already talked about because they were released as promos in Japan previously, but let's have a quick gander at them anyway. There is a Darkrai, which for 2 energy does 30 damage and sleep, or for 3 energy does 60 damage, and if they're already asleep, does 120 and heals 30. It's weak to fighting. You might as well just use Evil Towel because it's not a great attacker, and it's weak to fighting. That was a Darkrai in the free blister pack promo. Also in the free blister pack promo, you can get a Shiftry. Now, it's a stage 2 grass Pokemon, weak to fire, which means it ain't going to be very good against Pyroar despite being a stage 2. For 1 grass energy, 30 damage, and your opponent reveals his or her hand. Choose a Pokemon you find there and put it to the bottom of your opponent's deck. If you do, 30 more damage. Very convoluted, but essentially if they've got at least 1 Pokemon in their hand, you can put it one of your choice to the bottom of their deck, and it does 60 damage for a grass energy. Can be a little bit disruptive, can do 60 for 1 grass energy, but then again, there are cards like Dugtrio that can do 60 for 1 fighting energy, and Landorus with a strong energy does 50 for 1 energy and can be added to on a basic. So it's not hugely great. In the 1-pack promos, we've got a Talonflame, which is kind of interesting. For a single colourless energy, your opponent shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck and draws 4 cards, like a one-sided Judge, if anyone remembers that card, or ending your opponent to 4. As we all know, ending your opponent to 4 is not some kind of fantastic, amazing, disruptive force. It's just not that fantastic. And using your attack on a stage 2 Pokemon is at least your second turn of the game. You've got on a stage 2 out. What I will say is the art on this Talonflame is pretty nice, and like all the other promos, these are the old style Galaxy Holo rather than the newer style Holo, but that's about it. The most interesting one of the bunch is a Greninja, and this is a dark, not a water Greninja. Now again, it's a stage 2 of 130 HP and weak to fighting. These things are knocks against it. Stage 2 Pokemon are slow and clunky. Weak to fighting is not good given all the things around. But here's what I do like about Greninja. The ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may prevent all effects of attacks, including damage, done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon during your opponent's next turn. I.e., Greninja becomes absolutely invulnerable to your opponent's Pokemon. Now that's pretty good. But, you know, it's one turn. Gusting effects are everywhere nowadays. You can use Escape Rope. What I'm saying is, this is easy to get around. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's a very interesting card, but it's easy to play around and it only lasts for one turn, and after that turn it's back to being weak to fighting. Now it does have one attack, 60 damage plus 20 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon for a dark and a colourless. That's alright. That's pretty good for the for the cost. Now I know I just said that Shiftry doing 60 for 1 isn't great, but this is 60 and 20 to the bench automatically, whereas Shiftry did 60 for 1, you know, if they've got a Pokemon in their hand. It's not amazing, and the attack on its own isn't good. What I'm saying is that if you can make the most of the ability, the attack is probably just good enough. Losing Dark Patch, of course, is a big problem for this. It needs 2 energy, so you'll want to be running stuff like Energy Switch, or maybe even the Non-EX Eviltao onto your Froakie and Frogadiers, you know, attaching 1 energy to each of them to try and get them rolling. It's far from ideal, but it's one of those cards, it's a little interesting card that some people may choose to use at some point in the future. Now, the good news is the rest of the stuff is quite easy. The decks, World Championship decks have been revealed, and once again they have the cool little pin badge from Worlds if anyone's interested. And we know what they are. Andrew Estrada's Virizion Genesect deck, because he won Masters. Trent Orndorff's Trevenant Excelgor deck, because he won Seniors. And Haruto Kobayashi's Plasma deck, because he won Juniors. We were expecting all of those, and I had been able to confirm them from a previous picture which had been released. The last World Championship deck we didn't know about has been revealed, and it is Michikazu Suda's Crazy Punch deck. This is the Aromatisse Kangaskhan deck that got 3rd place in Masters, and it's a really cool deck to get as the 4th deck to be printed, which is really kind of cool. Do remember that all of these decks are not legal for tournament play. The cards have a silver border and a different back, and are signed by the person whose deck it is, but it's still really kind of cool that they're printing these, and they're good decks to teach people how to play. Or if you want to practice with a deck without going and buying all of the cards, you can play them in tournaments, but for testing, think of them as really good proxies, or a way to get a look at a really good deck list, or just as a cool little collector's item. And finally, we can see that there is a Gallade EX box. It's going to be released in January. We knew about this. We knew it was coming out. We've just got an image of it. 4 packs, Gallade EX and Jumbo Gallade EX. There's also going to be a Primal Clash blister. It's going to come with 3 booster packs and either a pin of Primal Kyogre or Primal Groudon, as they've been doing. And the Mega Diancie EX box is actually going to be a premium collection. Think of it like the Mega Metagross EX collection I've been telling you about. You get Mega Diancie EX promo, a jumbo version of the same card, Diancie EX promo, and a collector's pin, 6 packs, and a coin. So just like the Metagross collection, you've got the EX and the Mega EX, you've got the Jumbo EX, and you've got a coin, and you've got a pin, as well as some boosters. Now, something else to note about this, pretty much by omission, we can tell here that there is going to be no Spirit Link there. And this goes to and we don't have absolute confirmation of this yet, but this goes back to my prediction that these promo Mega EXs we're not getting Spirit Links for. My prediction has been that we are only getting Spirit Link cards for Mega EXs released from Phantom Forces onwards, and that seems to be the way they're going. They're announcing that you're getting a coin and a pin. If you were getting a Spirit Link card, surely they'd be announcing that as well, and let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, if they're not going to give you the Spirit Link for Mega Diancie EX in the Mega Diancie EX Premium Collection, when else are you going to get it? Are they just going to put a random the Anti-EX Spirit Link into our next set, Primal Clash? I mean, we might, quite frankly. There is every chance they will do that, but I would think, given the logic and given the past history of the releases, I don't think this is something we should be expecting. It could happen, but I don't think it's something we should be relying on. So now we need to go through all of the Phantom Forces cards, and once again we're going to go colour by colour, just because that makes the most sense. I won't be talking about any EXs or trainers, apart from the Flare ones, as I mentioned, on their own, but I will be referring back to them as we looked at them last week. So if you haven't listened to last week's podcast, week 118, I would heartily recommend that you do so before you listen to this bit, just so you're fully up to speed on all of the EXs and the trainers, because I'm going to be talking as if you are already aware of those cards. So moving into grass, and what we see is, and I did talk about this when we talked about the set in Japan, Phantom Gate, what we see is a bunch of kind of interesting cards. Now, you know I tend to look at the cards when they come out in Japan, and then I'll re-examine them when they're released in the US, UK, Europe and all of that, with a bit of hindsight, having seen everyone else's opinions and other commentary of them. So we've got a Venomoth, which for 1 energy, and it's a stage 1, which is doable I suppose, but 90 HP and a weakness to fire is not great. Whenever your opponent plays a trainer card from his or her hand, during his or her next turn, they flip a coin. If tails, it does nothing, but they still discard the card. It's used, they just don't get to do anything. Useful, but if they flip heads, then it's kind of irrelevant. And as I say so often on this podcast, we don't have a game nowadays where we can afford to spend a turn with a stage 1 attacking, so you're at least on your second turn of the game, even if you went second, just to maybe screw your opponent out of some trainers. I will say, once again, psychedelic artwork, and Venomoth looks strangely cute, which is something we haven't seen before. Levani fits into the exact same thing as I just said about Venomoth. It's a stage 2, it's weak to fire, and it's got 1 semi-useful attack. Coordinate for a single grass energy. Choose up to 2 of your bench Pokemon that don't have tools attached to them. For each of them, search your deck and attach it. But really, ladies and gentlemen, this is at least your second turn of the game. You've got a stage 2 Pokemon out, and it's going to have to be using Rare Candy unless it's your third turn of the game, and you're attacking to get some tools on the field. There is a supporter that came out in the Radiant collection, which was part of Legendary Treasures, called Elsie, which allowed you to search for free Pokemon tool cards. Now, nobody uses that because you don't want to use your supporter for the turn to search for Pokemon tools. Why would you want to use your attack for the turn? One very, very, very niche use for this, and I really don't think you should, one very niche use for this is the fact that you can get tools out under Trainer Lock in this way, only to your own Pokemon, not Team Flare that you would attach to somebody else's. But honestly, ladies and gentlemen, you really don't want to be using this. I suppose you could maybe use Levani, use its 1 energy attack to get some tools, and then use its free energy attack with a Muscle Band to 1-hit KO a Seismitoad, but that's really stretching it. It does 70 for free energy, but it doesn't allow you to use a double colourless. It is, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, not great. The one grass Pokemon which is potentially great, or at least useful, is Yanmega. It's a stage 1 Pokemon, which means you're looking at your second turn, but it's got free retreat. Already that's pretty good. It's got a weakness to lightning, which is going to depend on how much play Manectric EX sees as to whether this is going to be useful or not. But it's got a resistance to fighting, which is pretty good. It's a flying Pokemon. It's got an attack for a grass energy, Windfall, shuffle your hand into your deck, draw 6 cards. An end to 6, or Professor Oak's new theory for anyone that remembers back to the Heart Gold Soul Silver block. To be honest with you, this is a useful attack on a basic, but you don't want to be using this on a second turn of the game. Maybe if you go first, and this is, the third turn of the game in total, your opponent's just had 1 turn, I suppose it's useful as its consistency. We all have those turns in some games where we're drawing dead, where we've got nothing, where we've been end to 1, etc. So having a Yanmega on the bench for emergencies is quite useful. More likely you want to use its second attack, Surprise Strike, and this is for free colourless energy, meaning this can go into any deck, not necessarily just a grass-centric deck. If this Pokemon was on the bench and became your active Pokemon this turn, this attack does 50 more damage. Now, we've seen a bunch of effects in years past, sets past, which is I think back to the Beedrill from a few sets ago. If you evolved it this turn, it does blah blah blah. But this is coming active. All you need to do is have a Keldeo rushing in and retreating. Boom. He has become active this turn. Or use a switch to something else and then retreat it. Or retreat and switch from the something else. As long as you take it from the bench active, even if it started active, get it to the bench and then back active, you're doing 100 for free energy. Now 100 for free energy isn't spectacular, although it's not terrible. But what is useful is, it's a grass Pokemon that does 100 for free colourless energy. Which means you can put it into any deck, and it can one-hit KO any Grass Weak EX, like, for argument's sake, Seismitoad. It's a Stage 1 Seismitoad counter that fits into any deck, and for that reason, it could well be used. Plus, it's got the useful emergency first attack, plus it's got free retreat, so that's pretty useful. Now, moving into Fire, there are only 4 Fire Pokemon in the set, and one of them's kind of useful, and one of them I love, but I don't think it's going to work. There is another Talonflame, not the promo, a different one, which has also got pretty funky artwork, although it looks kind of wide. And it's got 2 interesting attacks. Now, it's a Stage 2, so again, all those things are there. It's weak to Lightning, because it's a flying Pokemon, which again goes back to my how much play is Manectric EX going to see. And by the way, looking around the boards and the forums and the Facebook sites in the past couple of weeks, people are getting psyched about Manectric EX. People are thinking it's going to see a lot of play. I'm still sceptical given how good fighting is at the moment, but a lot of people are hyping Manectric EX, and I know this is a complete tangent, it has nothing to do with Talonflame, but a lot of people are hyping Manectric EX as a let's play it in Virizion Genesect. Use it to get some damage on the board, and also use it so you're not having an entirely grass deck. Use it as an alternative to Virizion to get energy on the board. Use it as an alternate. Could work, you never know. But back to Talonflame. For 1 fire energy, 30 damage, flip 2 coins, 30 more for each heads. You hit a double heads, 90 damage, that's going to one-hit KO Virizion, Genesect, and any other Grass Weak EX. It's going to one-hit KO a lot of basic and Stage 1 Pokemon, and it's going to 2-hit KO pretty much anything unless it's resistant to fire, and top of my head I can't think of anything that is resistant to fire, though I could be wrong. So, when it comes down to it, you need to be able to hit a lot of heads. We've got the Victory Flip Victini, which can help, and how that's still legal I have no idea, but it is still in the format. But, you know, that's the best we can do with that one. The second attack, for free energy, but again, it's fire colourless, so you don't get to take advantage of double colourless energy. 120, and during the next turn, any damage is reduced by 40. Pretty good against fighting, because with the resistance, that's reducing damage done by 60 the following turn, which would make this a pretty good counter to something like Donphan, given that Donphan would essentially be doing minus 20, and then, you know, could add to it using things like strong energy and, well, we couldn't use Fighting Stadium, Muscle Band. I mean, even with a strong energy and a Muscle Band, it's only doing 20. So I suppose this could be a really cool Donphan counter, but it takes free energy and it's a Stage 2, which means that it may well be slower than most people can put up with in kind of the modern game. So, you know, I'll leave that up to you. By the way, if anyone wants to get fancy, I know that the Victini is still legal because it was reprinted in Legendary Treasures. I mean, how it's been and it's been reprinted like 17 times. I might be exaggerating. The other fire Pokemon, I don't think you should use to attack because it takes 4 energy to do 110 and 30 to itself. That's not good. But it's Pyroar. And the beautiful thing about Pyroar is it's already being played. And that's what's kind of cool if they release a card you're already using. If they were to release another Donphan at the moment, it might not be amazing, but you could easily put it into a deck as a Donphan deck. Now, of course, you can only have 4 Pyroar, so you would have to take out one of your Pyroar, which blocks attacks from basics in order to fit this bad boy in. But as long as you're willing to do that, ladies and gentlemen, you now have a tech, and what a tech it is. Once during your turn, you may discard a fire energy attached to this Pokemon. If you do, Pokemon Catcher / Lysandra. You get to bring one of your opponent's bench Pokemon active, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is a wonderful, 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 wonderful thing. We have all seen how useful Lysandra and Red Signal and Pokemon Catcher can be. This is another one of them, except you're already playing Pyroar, so you play 3 of the regular Pyroar, 1 of this, you stick it in as a tech. Now, to do Red Signal with Genesect DX, you have to attach a Plasma Energy from your hand. There's your energy attachment for the turn. With Pyroar, you have to discard an energy that's already attached to it, but let's not forget that these fire decks have Blacksmith. You can use Blacksmith to attach 2 fire energy to that Pyroar. You still get your energy attachment for the turn, and you get basically 2 Lysandras to use whenever you want. This is absolutely, ladies and gentlemen, a fantastic card you should all be using. Speaking of fantastic cards you should all be using, I can't really see any of them in water. We've got a Kingler that does 100 for 4 energy. That was a deliberate pause. That wasn't like a fault in the podcast. I was pausing just so that we can appreciate how rubbish that is. It also does 20 and reduces damage by 20 for a single colourless energy. Oh, a single water energy. Oh yeah, and it's got 100 HP and a retreat cost of 3. There is a Feraligatr, which could be useful if you're willing to put a huge amount of energy onto a stage 2. Now, it's got 150 HP, which is good for a stage 2, for a non-EX. For a water and a double colourless, it does 60. Flip a coin till you get tails. For each heads, discard an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. Now you could use that with the Team Flare cards we're going to talk about later, and Victory Piece Victini, and maybe have a really annoying deck. I mean, heck, against something like Rizzy and Genesect, that could pretty much end the game right there. Now, we've also got the attack Second Strike for 2 water and 2 double colourless. It does 80 damage, but then it does 80 more damage if there's any damage counters on it already. Again, this is far from amazing, but it's potentially a useful attack if you've already got damage on it. But that's about it. The only other one that's even worth looking at is Jellicent. It's a stage 1 water Pokemon for a single water energy. Attach 3 energy cards from your opponent's discard pile to his or her Pokemon in any way that you like. But most of the time, it's going to be useful anyway. The one thing this does do is it stops people using stuff like Lysandra's Trump card to get the energy back into their deck, because you can just attach it to useless Pokemon. But again, it's a stage 1 Pokemon. You're using this on your second turn of the game, and really, ladies and gentlemen, is this really going to be something that you're going to be wanting to use as your attack on your second turn of the game? I don't necessarily think so. Now, I'm going to deal with all the Night March Pokemon later. So, we're going to leave Joltik for a little bit. One card I am vaguely interested in is Galvantula. For a single electric energy, it allows you to bring up one of your opponent's bench Pokemon into the active, and it's now confused. Could be useful if you bring up something of a high retreat cost like a Landorus EX, but again, it's a stage 1. Now, there have been cards like this which have been used in the past. We have seen attacks very, very similar to this that have been used in decks, especially decks which have a disruptive element to them. There was a Maractus that was out not too long ago, I believe, that did a similar thing. But again, it's not really something which we're going to be wanting on a stage 1. On a basic, in a lock deck, maybe. But lock decks aren't around that much at the moment, and it's a stage 1. And I suppose I should mention Heliolisk. Now, it's weak to fighting, a stage 1, and it has 90 HP. So it's a bit slow, and it ain't hanging around for very long. But for a lightning and a colourless, it allows you to discard as many lightning energy attached to your Pokemon as you like. And it does 30 damage times the number of energy cards you discard. Now, you could potentially use this with Mega Manectric EX. Attach 2 basic energy cards from your discard pile to a bunch of bench Pokemon, and then after using that for a couple of turns, you can then bring Heliolisk in to do a bunch of damage. I don't think it's a good plan. It's a very weak stage 1 that takes 2 energy to attack anyway, although You can obviously discard the 2 that are attached to Heliolisk in order to do the attack, but it's going to be too slow to generate a bunch of damage, and it's on a very weak stage 1, and I don't think it's going to stay around for long enough. Going into Psychic then, we have Golbat and Crobat. Now I've talked about these before. These are the Sneaky Bite Pokemon. Golbat, ability Sneaky Bite. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Crobat, Surprise Bite. When you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may put 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. So you basically constantly evolve Crobat and Golbat and do damage, and the brilliant thing is you can then play Lissandra's trump card to get all of them back into your deck when they start getting knocked out. The other thing is all of these attack for a single energy. Zubat does 10 damage to one Pokemon for 1 colourless. Golbat does 10 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon for 1 colourless. And Crobat does 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for 1 colourless. And let's not forget the card Dimensional Valley, which basically reduces the attack cost by 1. You could play Dimensional Valley and in theory play absolutely no energy cards in this deck. Not to mention the fact that both Golbat and Crobat have free retreat. So you could play this with Max Potion, Dimensional Valley, etc. In fact, if I can get these cards up on PTCGO, I am going to make a Crobat Golbat deck with very little energy, Max Potion and all of that, just to see if it's any good. And if you draw any Golbat or Crobat that you want to send my way to help me make this deck, hit me up on Twitter @TheWassy and we can arrange that. But I'm going to try and get those cards. I will try and make a little deck breakdown of that just to see if it's any good. Speaking of cards which might potentially be good, Wobbuffet. Ability, Bide Barricade. As long as this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, each Pokemon in play, in each player's hand, and in each player's discard pile has no abilities except for Psychic Pokemon. Now it needs to be active and it's got a terrible attack, so you might be thinking, hang on a second, when would this ever be active? But let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that hit and run decks are making a comeback. They're decks which attack and then flick to the bench. Now I've talked at length about Donphan on this podcast and on my YouTube channel in recent weeks, so I shan't go into that in too much detail, but we also talked about Gengar EX last week, which does 60 damage and poison and goes to the bench. And I've told you that you can use Outrage Pokemon, Reshiram, Zekrom, Kyurem to put active to soak up damage, or you can use Trevenant to block trainers, or you can use Sigilyph to block EXs, or you could use Pyroar to block attacks from basic Pokemon. Well, here is another option. If you're playing against something like Virizion Genesect, you stick Wobbuffet active and you're guaranteed not to be red signalled. Or if you're playing against something like Aromatisse, you stick Wobbuffet active and they're not going to be able to move energy around and they're not going to be able to move energy around and Max Potion. One thing I will say, if you attack with Gengar and your opponent has a Virizion active, I will have to double check this ruling, but I believe it's correct. You would do the poison with the attack, which would be blocked by Virizion's ability. You would then put Wobbuffet active, at which point Virizion would not have the ability which blocked poison, but the poison would already have been nullified before Wobbuffet got put active, so you still wouldn't poison Virizion Genesect doing this. So I can see Wobbuffet being useful, but I don't like it as much as the ones we've already got. It's got 110 HP, it's weak to Psychic, so Mewtwo and Gengar and all those other Pokemon are going to have a field day, and it's not really helping you to win, especially against decks that don't use abilities. Think of something like, I don't know, let's say for argument's sake, we're using a Donphan deck. Now, if I'm playing Donphan against Gengar, I'm going to want to leave a Sigilyph active. Now, my opponent might go, ha, I can use Wobbuffet to get around Sigilyph. Well, no, you can't. Because if you want to attack, you have to put your Gengar active, and then you attack with Gengar, but Wobbuffet isn't active, so Sigilyph's ability is on, then you stick back to Wobbuffet, and Sigilyph's ability goes away, but it's irrelevant. Now, you can attack with Wobbuffet. It does 10 more damage for each damage counter. It does 10 damage, plus 10 more for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. And I suppose the advantage is that it's a basic, and you can use Dimensional Valley to bring that down to a single Psychic energy. It's also got a retreat cost of 2, so 1 Mystery Energy would give Wobbuffet free retreat, because Mystery Energy reduces your retreat cost by 2. But honestly, ladies and gentlemen, I can see Wobbuffet being used and putting it. I would not blame anyone, but if I'm playing a Gengar deck, I want Sigalith and I want Trevenant. They are both better attackers than Wobbuffet, and I think I would rather block trainers and abilities 90% of the time, and I'm going to want Sigalith to block EXs. I've seen people hyping Wobbuffet, which is why I've given it a good long discussion. I just don't think it's particularly good, to be honest with you, and that makes me a little bit sad. Now, there is a Musharna, which is a stage 1, so again, that same thing I keep saying over and over again. Your second turn of the game, this is your attack, you really want to be doing it. But for 1 Psychic Energy, shuffle 3 cards from your discard pile into your deck. It's a way to recover things like Special Energy, which you cannot recover in any other way. It can be used to get Basic Energy back, which you can't really do, although you can put it into your hand with things like Energy Retrieval and Superior Energy Retrieval. We also have Night March on Lampant, but I told you we're going to come back to the Night March Pokemon afterwards. We've got the Chandelure with awesomely trippy artwork again, which has got Fainting Spell, which is an amazing ability. If this Pokemon is knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, flip a coin. If heads, the attacking Pokemon is knocked out. It's only from damage, so if you can knock Chandelure out by poison, or any other special ability, or by placing damage counters, it's not going to activate this ability. The problem is, for a colourless and 2 double colourless, Curse Drop, put 6 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. That is overpriced, but potentially kind of interesting. Remembering you can use Dimensional Valley to bring that down to a Psychic and a colourless. One thing which might be worth doing is using this in a Gengar deck. Now you're trying to insert a stage 2 with Rare Candy and then you might be in trouble. But what you can do is attack with Gengar, switch into Chandelure. If they attack Chandelure, they need to knock it out with poison or something like that, and if they're unable to and they just attack into it, then there's a coin flip. And if it comes up heads, if it comes up tails, they're flipping the coin. No, I'm flipping the coin. If it comes up heads, that means that I'm getting a free prize for doing nothing. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think this is particularly amazing, but there's potential there. And Pumpkaboo also has Night March. Again, we've got Joltik, we've got Pumpkaboo, we've got Lampant. We'll come back to them in a little bit. Gourgeist. If this Pokemon has any grass energy attached to it, its HP goes up to 200. And Horror Note, for a Psychic double colourless, remember Dimensional Valley, does 10 times the number of cards in your hand. That's how much damage it does. How often are you going to have like 18 cards in your hand to one-hit EXs? Not to mention the fact that all your opponent has to do is, for instance, put a Wobbuffet active or get a Garbodor on the bench and attach a tool. The ability goes away immediately. Gourgeist's HP goes down to 100, and if there's more than 100 damage, or 100 damage I should say, or more on Gourgeist, Gourgeist will be immediately KO'd at that point. Now, I've played around with this with people who use things like Aspertia City Gym to raise a HP, or Pokemon Training Center to raise HP of Pokemon. There is nothing better than knocking out a Pokemon in the middle of your turn, getting a prize, and still getting an attack. I don't really like Gourgeist's ability, because it's way too easy to turn off abilities in the middle of a turn, and then Gourgeist will die. But you know, there we go. Now, moving into fighting, it's again pretty slim pickings. We have got a Glysaur which has Submission Hold, 1 fighting energy, 20 damage. Your opponent cannot attach energy from his or her hand to the defending Pokemon during his or her next turn. And I'm going to say what I always say about any card that denies or removes energy at the moment. Virizion Genesect. It very much relies on having 2 energy on Virizion, so if you can get this going very, very early before your opponent's got 2 energy onto Virizion, you can stop them attaching energy. You can play Crushing Hammer and Enhanced Hammer, which is now back in the format, to remove all of their energy, and boom, there we go, right away, your opponent isn't going to be able to do anything. But of course, Virizion has a retreat cost of 1, and if it retreats into a different Virizion, it's no longer the same defending Pokemon. It also does 60 and poison on a heads for a double colourless and a fighting. But it's a stage 1 with 90 HP, so I don't like it very much. Gigalith, I want to like Gigalith. He's a cool looking Pokemon, and all the cards he gets always end up interesting, but there's just nothing they're always massively overpriced. This Gigalith, it's weak to grass, bad against Virizion and Genesect, pretty good against anything else. It's got 140 HP, and it's a stage 2, with a retreat cost of 3. Now its ability, if this Pokemon has full HP, any damage done to it is reduced by 50. Play it with a bunch of Pokemon Center Lady and Potion and Max Potion, etc., and all of a sudden you're just reducing 50 pretty much every turn. But then its attack for 4 energy does 60, and next turn it does 40 more damage. Now it's time you start building in things like Strong Energy and Muscle Band and Fighting Stadium, you're going to be one-hitting EXs with that attack, just as soon as you've got 4 energy on it. Now you could use Landorus to pile energy onto Gigalith, that's an option. That's the non-EX Landorus which attaches from your discard pile. But even then, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a very, very slow deck. And then another candidate for something I might do on my YouTube channel in the future, but it's not beating Crobat in the race of things I want to be having a look at. Now, moving into Dark, there isn't very much at all. There's a Mighty Ina I've talked about before, which has a Dark and a Colourless, which allows it to do 30 damage. If head, discard an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. If this were a basic Pokemon, it would be really nice against Virizion and Genesect, but it's a stage 1, 90 HP, weak to fighting. I'm repeating myself here because a lot of these Pokemon are the same, but I'm making the same points. It's not really viable. Now there is a Spiritomb, which for 1 energy, colourless, does 10 damage, and your opponent cannot play Pokemon from his hand to evolve the defending Pokemon during his or her next turn. Useful, but evolution decks aren't really big enough to make it an issue. And even if they were, you retreat, it's not the defending Pokemon anymore, you can evolve it. Use Evo Soda, which a lot of people are playing, you can evolve it. So, potentially useful, but really not particularly great. Now, one card I do like is Liepard. Kind of. Now, this is a weird kind of attack, which doesn't really do much, but buys you time. It does 10 damage for 1 Dark energy, and again, stage 1, 90 HP, fighting weakness, same deal. But for 1 Dark energy, it does 10 damage. That's not very good. But it reduces damage done by 60. Hello, Seismitoad. Seismitoad does 50 damage if it's got a Muscle Band on, and unless it plays lasers and draws into lasers, that's all the damage it's ever doing. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is fun. Seismitoad can't hurt you. You might only be doing 10 damage or 30 with a Muscle Band, but 10 damage is a lot better than nothing. Now, of course, your opponent can play a Lysandre, and your opponent can play a Hypnotoxic Laser and all of that, but if you want to buy time against a Seismitoad deck while you set something up on your bench, that is potentially something we can use. Moving into Metal, there is not really anything in Metal I like, except for 1 card. But oh good golly, is it a doozy. Oh, there's a Klefki, which starters stupid Pokemon. Secondly, it's got Call for Family. 1 Metal Energy, 2 basic Pokemon on your bench. It's a basic Pokemon, it's got Call for Family. We need cards with Call for Family because decks keep coming up that want this attack. Now I know we might have better options at the moment, but this is going to be around for some time to come. So for the time being, it's good, quite frankly. It's nice that we have this Pokemon with Call for Family. Now, Emolga from Legendary Treasures, the Radiant Collection, also has Call for Family and free Retreat, whereas Klefki has a Retreat of 1, and needs Metal Energy rather than Emolga's Colourless Energy. But sooner or later, Emolga's going to be rotated, we'll still have Klefki. But the one card we do have from Metal, which is very, very useful, and is, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, a doozy, is Bronzong. And I've talked about it a lot over the last few weeks, so I shan't dwell. I even talked about it a lot last week. 90 HP, stage 1, attach a Metal Energy, this is an ability, from the discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Just like E-Electric used to do. I would play this with Dialga EX and Muscle Band. It's going to potentially be a very, very good deck and a very fun deck to use. Will it be amazing? I don't know, ladies and gentlemen. But have a go. And there's a lot of decks coming out of this which could potentially be good. The Crobat Golbat deck has the potential to be an interesting deck, as does a Gigalith one. But Bronzong and Dialga, and you probably stick an Edge/EX in there as well, this really has the potential to be really quite exciting. Now, hands up who knew Deden was a fairy Pokemon. probably people who have played X and Y more than I have. I'm going to be simple, ladies and gentlemen. I don't care if it is a fairy Pokemon. He sucks. Now, he does have an attack for a colourless energy that paralyses on a coin flip, and we have Victory Star Victini, which gives you then a 75% chance of paralysis. And remember, there were those electric decks, so I think Ross Cawthorn started it a little while back, and they would actually play the Dynamo, which could paralyse on a coin flip, with Victory Flip Victini, and they would do this to basically leave your opponent paralysed turn after turn after turn in order to set up enough electrics. There's potential there. Other fairy Pokemon include a Diancie, and it sucks, and a Slurpluff. And Slurpluff seems to be one of... There are certain Pokemon where there's things. So, for instance, Pyroar has fun abilities. That's what we see. And Slurpluff, again, is one of these. We've already got the one that blocks special conditions. This one, once during your turn, you may draw a card. If he's active, draw one more card. It's a cool little draw engine. It's a stage 1. It's weak to metal, which, unless, if Bronzong starts seeing a lot of play, this will become more relevant. But at the moment, it's not that relevant. So Slurpluff it's kind of a cool little Pokemon. There's some use there. So, yeah. Slurpluff's kind of cool. And, of course, if your active Pokemon dies, you put Slurpluff up between turns, draw 2 cards, and then you can retreat it to your bench. It's a nice little draw engine. So, just Dragon and Colourless left. Moving into Dragon, we have a Hydreigon with a terrible attack and an interesting ability, Dark Impulse. Once during your turn, you may attach a Dark Energy from your discard pile to your active Pokemon. It's like a Dark Patch that goes to your active. And I can see people playing this with Yveltal, because Yveltal is still one of the best, if not the best attacker in the game. And you put 2 Hydreigon on the bench. You can use Evil Ball every turn, Y-Cyclone every turn if you've got an energy in your hand, even if your Yveltals are getting knocked out. You can very, very quickly build up a very big, menacing Yveltal by getting a couple of Hydreigon on the bench. Will Hydreigon Yveltal be any good? I don't know, but once again, here is a deck which I think people should be trying. So, just to give you the list again, we've got Crobat and Golbat decks with Max Potion and all of that. We have got Hydreigon Yveltal, we've got Bronzong Dialga, and we've got Landorus Gigalith, although Gigalith is by far the weakest of those ones. So there's a lot of interesting decks coming out of that. Whether they'll see any use, I don't know. But the way I see it, I'm going to tell you about these decks on the podcast. And if you want to go and try them out, then by all means, please do so. I'm going to have a go at them on my YouTube channel at some point, so you can come and have a look at how they work. And I extend the same invitation to you guys that I always do. If you want to see one of these decks on my YouTube channel, let me know. I know I haven't been uploading videos for the last couple of weeks, but I'm hoping Thursday this week I shall be able to start doing so again, because PTCG will be out of maintenance, and I am assured that my work PC will be allowing me to do so by then. So that is good, quite frankly. But if you email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk or tweet me at the Wassy, and if I get chance and I have the cards, and that is a big if, then I shall have a look at the deck you've requested on my YouTube channel. We've also got Goodra, which is an interesting little card which we've talked about before, which I believe stops you attaching Pokemon tool cards, which each player. Now it does stop these annoying Team Flare tools, which I suppose is quite good. And it's, if you play a Startling Megaphone to shut down your opponent's Garbodor, then that means that Goodra is going to stop them attaching a tool to get Garbodor up and running again. But really, how much use is this going to be on a Stage 2 Pokemon that's going to be sitting on your bench not attacking? I would say not very much. And moving into Colourless, we've got the same kind of stuff again. There's a wonderful little Fearow with Fly for a double Colourless on a Stage 1 Pokemon, 90 HP, resistance to Fighting, which is good. Flip a coin. If Tails the attack does nothing, if Heads prevent all effective attacks, including damage, done to Fearow during your opponent's next turn. Again, and I'm talking about this card a lot today, but Victory Star Victini. How cool would that be? 3 turns out of 4, you're going to be stopping your opponent attacking next turn. Fearo's going to have immunity, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a wonderful, wonderful thing. There's a Blissey, which isn't particularly good. There is a Regigigas, and he's back in the format, and I love that he's back in the format, and I love the artwork. But that's pretty much it. It does 80 for free energy and reduces damage done the next turn by 40, but it's weak to fighting, and that's not very good at all in today's modern game. There's a Diggersby that stage 1 for a double colourless energy on a head discards an energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. This would have been... No, it wouldn't. I was going to say it would have been cool for the Professor Cup, but it's a rare. And that's about it. So, let's go back and have a look at these Night March Pokemon. What we have is we have Joltik, 30 HP basic with Night March. 20 damage times the number of Pokemon in your discard pile that have the Night March attack for a double colourless. Very, very weak. It's got a weakness to fighting, but nobody cares, it ain't lasting that long. Lampent, stage 1, Night March for a Psychic and a double colourless. Remember, Dimensional Valley can bring that down to Psychic colourless. 20 times the number of Pokemon in your discard pile that have the Night March attack. So we've got Joltik, we've got Lampent. Then we come to Pumpkaboo. Basic Pokemon, 60 HP, Night March. For free colourless energy, 20 times the number of Pokemon in your discard pile that have the Night March attack. So you play 4 Pumpkaboo, you'd play a 4/4 Litwick Lampent line, and you'd play 4 Joltik. Now, you could even play the Galvantula with the Joltik to buy yourself a turn by bringing Pokemon active and confusing them. Now, they're weak HP. Joltik has 30, Lampent has 70, and Pumpkaboo has 60. But what is cool about these cards, ladies and gentlemen, is that it's quick. You get 9 of these, and you're going to be playing 12 of them. You get 9 of them in your discard pile. You are one-hit KOing EXs. But you're going to be playing Muscle Band, so you get 8 of them in your discard pile. And you're going to be going for EXs. Oh, gee whiz, that doesn't sound particularly great. They're all too weak. Why don't you play this with Eevees as well? Play it with Flareon. Why wouldn't you play it with Flareon? You're playing, a large amount of Pokemon and wanting to discard them. Why not play Flareon? Now, Lyssandra's trump card is going to screw this deck over somewhat, I admit. But, what can you do? You just have to hope your opponent doesn't play it. You could be doing very big damage very quickly. And this is a very last deck I'm going to tell you about that's coming out of this set. But it's one you should consider. Now, the thing is, you're going to be playing a lot of weak, low HP Pokemon. And they're going to be dropping like flies. But they're all single prize Pokemon. They're not EXs. So what you basically do is you admit you're going to die every turn. But you just go ahead and roll with, your Joltik's early game, and then, because the problem is you need 2 energy attachments to get your Pumpkaboo and your Lampent going. So you want to be using essentially Joltik. And who thought Joltik would end up being one of your main attackers? You're going to be running with Joltik fairly early game, and then late game transitioning into Flareon or something like Pumpkaboo, which at that stage could be one hitting EXs. And the brilliant thing is, you can be basically going Joltik DCE attack, whereas your opponent is probably going to have more stuff. Now, if you run out of DCEs, this is going to suck. It's going to be vulnerable to Enhanced Hammer. I'm going to take a proper look at this deck next week. But what I will say here is, yeah, you're vulnerable to Enhanced Hammer. Yeah, everything but Joltik takes more than 1 energy attachment, and bearing in mind that Enhanced Hammer is a thing, so Joltik, so you're going to run out of double colourless energy quite quickly. But it's going to be quite easy to stream these Pokemon as long as you don't run out of DCEs or things of that nature. And again, this is a very simple deck. All you need really is Muscle Band, bunch of Pokemon, DCE, a few other energy, probably Psychic for Lampent, and that's about it, to be honest with you. So, potentially, this could be a fun little deck. If it's going to be massively competitive, I don't know. It seems very flimsy to me. This is probably another one, along with the Golbat and Crobat, that I'm going to start testing quite soon. Of course, regionals are coming up in the UK soon, so maybe I should be trying to planned for them. It's 2 weeks Saturday, the first regional, down in Newport, and I shall be there. No idea what I'm going to play, because with my computer problems, I haven't actually really been testing very much lately. But Seismitoad Garbodor's on the table, Donphan's on the table. I quite like the idea of playing an Eviltao deck. I'm not going to lie to you. But I'm going to start testing a lot more over the next couple of weeks. I shall see what I come up with. So, they are all the cards you need to know, apart from these 2 Team Flare cards, which I forgot last week. And they're lovely for colourblind people, because a large part of the card is black writing on a red background. And they are Pokemon tools that you attach to your opponent's Pokemon EX, only Pokemon EX, so you can't use this to screw over things like Donphan. We have Headringer. Headringer, the attacks of the Pokemon this card are attached to cost 1 colourless energy more. Oh, that's going to be lovely. That is going to be absolutely lovely. Virizion Genesect. How horrible is this going to be for Virizion Genesect? I've talked at length on this podcast many times about the fact that Virizion needs those 2 energy attachments. You put Headringer on, those 2 energy attachments are no longer good enough. Jamming Net. The attacks this Pokemon this card is attached to do 20 less damage, so this is to any Pokemon, not just EXs. And this is before weakness and resistance. So you play Jamming Net, and it stops 20 damage. Now, from what I've been seeing on the forums and the boards, and there's no guarantee this is going to roll out when regionals come around again, but what people have been saying is that Headringer is the way to go. Headringer has been getting a lot more good press than Jamming Net has been. Whether it's going to be any good or not, the answer is, ladies and gentlemen, I don't really know. But it's going to be fun finding out. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is everything you need to know about Phantom Forces. Now, that is pretty much 2 hours of podcast, but I like to think that in those 2 hours of podcast, you've basically learned everything you need to know about Phantom Forces. Now, I won't have given you all of the answers, but I will have told you about all of the relevant cards. I will have given you some ideas. I will have told you their strengths and weaknesses and given you some deck ideas. Now, it's up to you to go and play with these. As always, if you think I've missed anything, or if you think that I have if you think I've missed anything, or if you think I've forgotten anything, or there's just things that you've noticed that I want to go for, or even if you just want to, say hello and tell me you like the podcast, you can tweet me at the Wassy, you can email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or just leave a comment below if you're listening on YouTube or SoundCloud or anything like that, and I will get back to you when I can. I know the YouTube channel has been a little bit quiet, but I've explained the technical problems. I'm hoping they will be fixed by Thursday, which for most of you should be probably the day after this particular podcast airs, and then we can get back to that. Now, first of all, I'm going to be showing you this Evolutions deck, but then I'm going to get on to showing you other decks, maybe some that have done well at regionals, maybe some new decks from Phantom Forces like this Pumpkaboo, Joltik, Lampent Flareon deck. As always, I will be back next week. Thank you very much for listening. Look after yourselves till then. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.